Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Maybe I'm Just Not Getting It. I'm your podcast host, Robert Davis, and in today's episode, I wanted to talk about something that I've seen a good amount in the media and through different type of avenues, and I wanted to discuss because I think it's representative of a larger problem, or I think it's one of those times where we see kind of issues that are almost like movie like ish come to life. And that's kind of the concept of class warfare. And in starting, I want to take a and I want to take a quote, and it's kind of paraphrasing more than a quote that I remember hearing from Charles Barkley actually. In terms, and it was not that long ago, in terms of talking about kind of like the problems of this country, and I kind of agree and disagree with like certain parts of it, but I think the quote is very representative of kind of where we are today. And it's just that, he was saying that although you have these bases of division in America like racism, which are inherently an all right evil, and there's no justification for it. The what seems to be, and it's hard to say this as a black man, especially a black man that was raised with, to be very cognizant of his history, both in terms of black history and both in terms of white history and how white history has viewed and treated black history. But at the same time, I do agree with the concept of I think this country has formed classism into the new way of defining racism. And he was saying essentially that how this country is built to divide the people and to keep, essentially the lower class fighting amongst themselves or the inferior class fighting amongst themselves to the, I guess, delight or to the ease of the superior class is through classism, is through making you feel like the person next to you is different from you because they make more than you or make less than you. And that's how, especially those in power that are most likely the wealthiest, keep their power. And it's other ways of division are easy, but that seems to be the more increasingly inherent way to go about it. And so that's really kind of what I want to talk about today is what I just determine as class warfare or kind of this class division that is inherently growing in our country and across the world in general. And so, we start by talking about, people love to find ways to divide each other. That's been since the dawn of time. I mean, racism, sexism, ageism, gang, just anywhere you go, there's always going to be a group. There's always going to be, we're this, yeah, you're not this. And so, we see that with social clubs, fraternities, sororities, teams, workplace divisions, units. Like people will find a way inherently. I think it's one of the probably nastier inherent ways in our society that we just divide each other. We find ways to make it, to say, I'm this, you're this. I'm this, you're not this, And I think classism has become one of the more socially acceptable ways to do so in our country, especially lately. And that's why we have seen it grow so much. And so I think before I go into it further, let's talk about just about a basis what classism is, right? So classism is essentially, in a very layman's terms way of looking at it, dividing or associating people by their economic or their financial status. When we think about classism in the typical sense, we think of the rich people think they're on top, the poor people are on bottom. Poor people are essentially, or the impoverished, or however you want to say it. I don't want to sound impersonal or lacking empathy in this, conversation, but I'm going to use terminology here that might be a little blunt. And usually, generally with this, you see the understanding that the poor are viewed as the lesser class with, less rights, or viewed as less human because of that. I take homelessness as a big example of this, but I'm gonna just stick with the general cause for now. We'll get into different examples later. And so classism, in a sense, works both ways. You know, it's, you love the rich and you hate the poor, or in the sense that we've seen it grow with your Luigi Mangione type of situation. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. You hate the rich and you, I don't say love the poor, but you hate the rich and you love the poor. And so we seen it work both ways and every way in between. The war on the middle class, if the middle class views themselves as higher than the lower class, if the lower class views themselves as higher than the extremely impoverished or the unhoused. It's a never ending cycle. And as money dictates our society more and more, I think, and when I say as money dictates our society, I mean money dictates what's popular, money dictates what's ethical nowadays. People say it doesn't matter because I'm getting paid. A lot of acts that used to be shunned or looked down upon are accepted now because we've accepted that those acts have a financial value to them, and that financial value overrides whatever the ethical value was. And so I think as we see that, we'll see classism become more prevalent and more widespread as time goes on. And so we talk about, well, why does this matter? I mean, I think first, classism, in a sense, it mixes, it mixes a variety of different prejudices. If I had racist tendencies, I'm going to use racism against black people as my example because it's an example I very openly can understand and easily explain from a white person's perspective, let's say from a rich white man's perspective. If I have kind of a racist prejudice against me, I mean against, like black people per se, and I view all black people as poor or not on my financial level, then classism helps me live with that. It helps me justify that. Yeah, not, and I can say, oh, it's not because you're black, it's because you're this. You're not, I don't live with black people not because there's no black, not because I don't find living with black people discomforting or unsettling. It's because they're not on my, there's none here, there's none in this financial status, and that's their fault. We get that. I mean, the same with sexism. Classism is used a lot of times in that regard of, women not earning enough money, or sometimes on the flip side of women earning too much money and thinking that maybe a man shouldn't be living in this, a man isn't on her level either. And I think it goes back, I mean, the same with ageism, with religious beliefs, especially when those religious beliefs come from a certain sect of people. It's easy to say, well, yeah, this religious belief, let's say being Muslim, for example, this religious belief is, I think that this religious belief is associated with a lower class of people because maybe I only think of Muslim faith being by immigrants from a certain country or something like that. And I don't see them being on my economic class level. So I associate that whole religious belief with being under my class level or under my my societal level. Sorry. And it just relies heavily on a variety of different socioeconomic and sociocultural factors where you can you can pick the points of different prejudices out and put that into classism. Because generally at the top, you'll see rich white. And it's easy for them to say, hey, I'm not racist. Poor people, I'm not racist. Minorities just happen to be poor. On the flip side of that, if I, as a black person, have an inherent racism towards white people, and I'm gonna say an unreasonable inherent racism, because while I'm not under the belief that black people can't be racist, I do understand the concept that why black people have a hyper focus on racism because it was a concept that was beaten to their heads. So with that being said, if I think, oh, well, if I have, as a black man, have an inherent type of racism towards white people, I would view all rich white people, all rich, and oh, that mean rich white people don't give a shit about me. So therefore, that class of people, the rich, I have already inherently kind of spread that whole kind of hate against. And so we just see where that can kind of get out of whack a bit. And the reason I bring that up is because classism plays into this false narrative that money transcends all prejudices and being rich is essentially being above all. We see this with we see this with a lot of minority celebrities, especially very wealthy ones. And again, I'll get into specific examples later, but we do see that with that in terms of always, also with minority politicians that get to a certain level of power, especially working within the Republican Party. I think the Democrat is a little bit different, but especially within the Republican Party, it's this concept of almost, oh, well, I'm one of the good types of this, or if they were living the life I was, they would act differently. I think that kind of gets into that. I laugh at the O.J. Simpson narrative. I'm not black, I'm O.J. Like that's that classism type of thing, where it thinks, oh yeah, because you're rich, that's a trend. It transcends you beyond your social status. Like I'm not a black man, I'm a rich black man. So whatever black people dealing with that because they ain't got money. I don't deal with that because I do. That sort of classism, that sort of thought that money transcends everything, which to a lot of people is not a lie. I mean, and go back to the original point of money dictating society. It has merit to it, but that thought and belief can be very dangerous into getting people to just think that as long as I got money, everything is good. And then the negative impact of it, is your worth being based upon your wealth. I mean, and, we know it's crazy because the thing that a lot of media builds in, and whether it's like, just your end of the day good messages, money isn't everything. We see that in so many different avenues. Money isn't everything. They say money isn't everything. Money isn't everything. Money won't make you happy. Money can't buy you happiness. Money can make your life easier, but it doesn't mean that your life will be easier or your life will be happier. Money, we get all of this. But then you see these examples, this classism type of base where it's always your worth is based upon your wealth. And I just think, if you're wealthy, and it's like, if you're wealthy, all the good things in the world will happen to you. And if you're poor, that's your fault and all the bad things will happen to you. And then on the flip side, it's coming to this also impact of thinking that if you're rich, if you're beyond wealthy, then you deserve for bad things to happen to you because your wealth came from some sort of method that shouldn't have happened. And I think both sides are equally as fucked up, just to be honest. One side, obviously, when you're looking down on the poor, impacts a lot more people than when you're looking down on the rich, in a sense, if I'm making sense. But either way, that's still kind of fucked up. And so, what type of example? There's plenty of examples that are out there of this. We talk about hip hop music is a big one in the sense of, I think a lot of rap is inherently classist, especially nowadays. And you think of a lot of rappers, I'm going to use Rick Ross and Drake as two big ones. But they can probably be switched out for 100 different people. In terms of rappers that a lot of their content is based upon them talking about things they have that other people don't, and why they are better than these people because they don't have this. Because they're not able to get the same level of things they have. A lot of Rick Ross music is essentially him just walking around his house talking about his drapes and his blinds and his counters. Same with Drake, and these lines about these places they've went and these vehicles they have, and the way that they can be catered to and chauffeured around, in a sense that it's a brag of I have this and you can't. And then when they talk about, and the same in all rap. Rap is based upon, I always say, dissing the imaginary person. Like, oh yeah, and you niggas think this and y'all do this and y'all lame because of this. But that imaginary person they're talking about is always, you don't have this. You couldn't afford this. You can't do this. You can't get these type of women. You can't. My time is worth more than yours. Your house isn't as big as mine. Your pool isn't as big as mine. Your bed isn't as big as mine. Your chains aren't as expensive as mine, or your diamonds aren't as clear as mine, and that makes you less of a person compared to me. And I think that inherent mocking of, I guess, those who don't have your status of wealth is, in a vacuum, okay, because it's music. But I think the problem becomes when it's pushed to an audience that so clearly most of the times can't really relate or associate with that, right? Like, it pushes this almost like dream. Like, you listen to Rick Ross with the dream that one day you might not want to be Rick Ross or live like Rick Ross or even like Rick Ross, but if you want to have those things, and it does kind of push to the concept of, you feel like, man, like, am I less of a person because I don't, or am I not, is my importance, is my worth to the world less because I don't have all of this, or because I don't have the amount of money in my bank account to be able to push these type of to be able to live the way that they live, or to afford the type of things they afford, or just to afford things in excess like I would want to, you know and I think that's a very dangerous concept that hip hop music and a lot of rappers push. But at the same time, hip hop in its sense is a bragging culture. Like, I brag about what I have. I brag about the person I am. It's very macho. It's very exorbitant in that sense. So I get it, but it does, when those that are listening to it are oftentimes not in that position. It does keep spreading that classes type of thing, of where I'm better than you and I'm better than all you niggas because I got this, and if you ain't got this, you ain't shit. And so for somebody to listen, how do they think they better? They want to go out and get those same things. Everybody's going to spend their last on a chain, or to get their grill done, or to buy some designer clothes or some designer shoes, or to make sure that their haircut is the cleanest, or whatever the case may be, because to them that's trying to present that classism, that I'm of a different status, of a different tier than what would be deemed to be worthless. You know, the and then I spoke about this to a degree, but it's one thing I do want to talk about, is the Luigi Mangione thing. I think that's on the flip side of it, right? Like, and I'm not gonna go through the whole case because I don't believe this isn't the platform for it. And I think that the point that I want to bring from it is that, more not based upon what he did or what he's been accused of doing, I guess, because there's always been people that have committed murders or heinous acts based upon whatever ideology they had in their head at the time. Whether the person that was the victim of their assault or attack had something, was the reason for that, or whether it was a random attack, whatever the case may be. There's always been some, there's always been random attacks, or these attacks because of an ideology, or this person caused this, or this person's evil, so on and so. My point that I want to talk about here is more the public reaction to it, because it was one of the first times, and I think it's kind of a dark type of thought, where people are celebrating it. Like, oh yeah, in the sense of, yeah, if he killed him, that guy deserved it. Free him, because United Healthcare screws over people every day, causing them hurt, pain, and people to die in sad, in sickness and pain and situation that they shouldn't have been. And because of that, this man deserved that. Any bad thing that happened to him. And I think that we have to take a step back when we take those sort of the stances and really evaluate where we are or what it is that we are trying to say in that. I mean, because like, just to start, like, my personal perspective on it is like, I get that United Healthcare fucks over a lot of people in terms of, denying claims, trying to find any way to avoid helping people when they can, from the concept of cutting liability, cutting costs. I get that. I got 100% get that. And I get that the CEO, I forget his name, as the head of that organization, first, you're going to be, because the organization itself, even though it is taxed and treated like a separate individual, it's not its own actual person. So you, as the CEO, are going to be the face of that quote unquote evil corporation. I get that. And I get that you have to own that if you do fucked up practices, you're going to have people look at you in a fucked up way. I get that as well. My thing is that still that this was somebody's child. This was somebody's family member. And another person stalked, hunted, and killed them. Regardless of kind of what we can say about their job, which is what we're saying, that they did an evil job. Sure. That doesn't justify somebody doing that to them. And when that person does it to them, it doesn't justify that they treat it like, they did the world some sort of service. One, because they didn't. I mean, United Healthcare is not going to stop their practices or policy. They're just going to appoint another CEO to keep doing the same things. So they didn't, what I'm saying? It wasn't like there was a stopping or was some act that saved the world or changed anything. He just killed somebody because he felt like he wanted to, that person needed to pay. And he stalked, plotted, and killed that man. And I think when we look at people that are so happy and gleeful because this happened to somebody based upon, I mean, these ultra rich corporations, because this was an ultra rich person, this ultra rich corporation, they don't care. And, it's time that we have to start taking the power back, which I do agree people have to start taking the power back. But I don't see how that's the way in doing it. But then again, as I've understood from revolutions before, and I don't think this is a revolutionary act, but I've understood that you can't control what that looks like. And when people are desperate, oftentimes you can't control what that desperate act looks like. But I do think that you can judge it for what it is and say, is it part of a larger conversation on why he did what he did? Yes. But does that mean that what he did is justified? No. But that's just, my thought on it. To bring it back to the classism standpoint, the lack of empathy towards the CEO. And I'm just talking about this CEO. I get, again, that if you're the face of a company, evil. Like, I'm not saying, oh, treat all CEOs with respect and kindness because they do. No, I'm not saying that. But I do think applauding the murder of someone is a dark spiral and a slippery slope that we as a nation don't want to go down. I mean, and I get that the rich probably applaud the applaud, the hardships and the deaths of the poor all the time. And I don't think they're any more right in that. And I would hope they take that same lesson to say, if you want people to be more empathetic towards you and not view you as soulless, heartless creatures that everything that they hope bad things happen to make yourself more empathetic towards them as well. And hopefully there can be some sort of mutual type of calmness, at least within that. And that kind of brings me to the next example I kind of want to talk to, which was the eat the rich type of movement, which is kind of based upon that same strategy. And I think, I mean, to the points I've already talked about, I mean, I think it's very ingenuine and it's built out of pain and more or less, I don't want to say not knowing who to aim that anger at, because I think it is kind of in the right place. I just think it's the wrong type of response. I mean, I think the eat the rich type of movement, first off, just in that concept, first off, it doesn't work. Like, I mean, if you killed all rich people, the money wouldn't come back. You know what I'm saying? The concept of destroy the rich wouldn't come back. To that wealth wouldn't come back to the general populace. It would just stay within. I mean, that's what the laws are designed to do, to keep that wealth within them. Like, so that's the first part. But I think that the eat the rich kind of movement is it's one. I mean, it is a promotion of class warfare in a sense, but I think it is also asking people to hate almost an unknown enemy, because everybody has a different understanding of what rich is, or a different, for somebody, and based upon wherever they're at, whenever you're looking up different, varying levels of where you're looking at is, I mean, is rich to you. If you're middle class, are you looked at as rich by the poor class? Do they view that as eating the rich? Is it just the ultra wealthy 1%? I mean, if that's the case, how would you even find and meet these people? Because they're not those that you just see in everyday life. And so I think the eat the rich movement is one where, it spreads a popularity online, that promotes kind of these ingenuine class warfare ideas. And it's something that we have to think about in terms of being empathetic towards each other and understanding the concept that somebody's ultra wealth may come from a problematic place, and that needs to be discussed and pointed out and criticized. Doesn't mean that that person should be, drugged out and beat in the street, or that every rich person is a product of evil. And I think that's, just that kind of cooling of the rhetoric, in a sense, would take us a long way. On the flip side of that, because I do like, again, discussing both sides of the topic, I think movies and a lot of media, which quite frankly show where how the rich abuse and how easy it is, quite frankly, for them to abuse the poor in a similar way. Movies like the Purge series, Squid Games, that kind of hyper focus on how money can make people do things against their own will. Um, Not against their own will, but money makes people do things they normally wouldn't do. Um, and how money can people can justify horrific acts because they have money. Um, and I don't think that these movies are completely fiction. We see even at the most basic level, people paying homeless people to fight on the street. Like, that's a different level of classism, but it is classism. Like, and I think these movies where it projects these concepts of where the rich are exploiting the poor. I mean, I think they're made because of the fact that there's so many real life examples of it. I don't think they're made just out of complete fabrication. And I think that is something to stress in terms of how it is how it keeps extending kind of this gap and this animosity between the poor and the rich. And there's a reason why these type of things have become so popular in the past couple years in our culture, is because people can more identify with it, or they can more understand, where those concepts come from. And I think we just have to. I don't. I mean, I think this is different than the prior examples where I was like, oh, we have to kind of cool the rhetoric. I think we have to learn from these things to understand on a personal level, on every like for every single person, how can we be more empathetic towards the less fortunate, and how can we not look to take advantage of people just because they aren't in the same financial class as us, and how do we create a world where everyone can have an opportunity to succeed. And I get that with, the basic concept of scarcity with resources, that everybody's not going to be able to get everything they want. I do understand that. But how do we create a world where people aren't in the position where they can be so easily vulnerable and manipulated, and people aren't in the position to where they can so easily manipulate those as well. And I think that's what at least movies like that make me think of. It just, how do we change this? Not in the sense of like, oh, how do we take money out of rich people's pockets, but how do we put more money? And maybe that's how. Now, how do we put more money in the pockets of the less fortunate? How do we give them more economic chances? How do we get people to, even without giving people, how do we get people to not look at a homeless person like a piece of trash on the street, or look at an ultra rich person like an evil villain if they aren't evil, you know? And so that's just something that I think about when I see those. Rich people, I think, are so it's something I want to talk about in terms of those that I guess rich people, and when I say that, I mean whites and minorities that support our current president Trump based upon, I guess, liking his economic policies or the tax cuts. That's another example of where I think about that kind of class warfare type of thing at, or classism type of thing at. Talked about this earlier. You see a lot of black celebrities. And celebrities of all minorities, quite frankly, that voted for Trump because even though they might, I think Trump. I don't think Trump is. I think Trump has a racist tendency. I don't think he's like, oh, I hate all black people, racist, but I do think he's the type to be like, oh, you're one of the good black people type of racist. And I think, again, back to the point of when minorities get to a certain financial level, and some of them at least, they think, yeah, those issues that, people I grew up with or people that my fans are, whatever, they don't apply to me, so I'm different. And a lot of rich people voted for Trump because of that. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, doesn't matter. They voted for Trump because of that. Because his financial policies impacted them more in a beneficial way because they were rich and they felt like, yeah. So everything else that he's talking about doesn't matter to me because financially it benefits me. Financially, I'm different than y'all. It might be worse for black people, but it's better for rich people, and rich outweighs black. I think that is, I think that's a clear sign of classism and a clear sign of how those lines draw out. And I mean, I think it's hard to get people to vote against their own self interest over the interest of the group of people they may belong to. But it's going to require people to start looking at it like that to a degree of, I understand that, I'm rich and this may work better for me because I'm rich, but does it work better for my community? Does it work better for my family, outside of those that can rely upon my wealth? And I think a lot of times classism is, as long as it can rely upon wealth, it's good and there's no problems. Or at least the problems can outweigh that. And then I brought this up a few times, but I just wanted to talk about it is I think the homelessness or the unhoused issue is a definite issue of class warfare. I know generally people like to take low poverty and unhoused and put that in one. I think classism kind of runs into four different boxes. I think you have the I mean, you can definitely make it into more many categories. So let's say five. I think you have the ultra wealthy, the upper class, the middle class, the lower class, and the extremely impoverished. I think you have those five kind of classes. I think I said five. And I think just to focus on the homelessness or the extremely impoverished, it's oftentimes from every other class's standpoint easy for them to look at a homeless person on the street as if they are not there or as if they are not a human being. If that, it's easy for the police to treat them like that. It's easy for people to treat them like that. And I think that's classism in the sense of, I mean, I get not asking everybody at any given point to be like, oh, I'm going to save this person. But I think the concept of disassociating their humanity, because of where they are in their life economically, because they can't afford to provide themselves, whatever reason, because it may be self-inflicted reasons, maybe societal, maybe a mix of both. But to be able to justify that as saying, I'm not, I mean, this person deserves this or this their life because of A, B, and C. I think it's that classism type of example that we have to avoid, where we are able to again say somebody deserves this, or whatever happened to this person is their own fault, or just to ignore their existence in general because of that, because they are homeless or because they are extremely impoverished. I think it's a widening feeling and it's a widening thought that goes on and amongst again every other social class above it, and it's just something that we need to think about from our own humanity standpoint. And so I kind of led into this, but I mean, I think this classism thing brings out many different concerns. Mainly, we're causing a lack of morality and empathy for people based upon their financial status. I mean, I think that's, I mean, I don't know how more clearly to say it than that, in the sense of we cannot, whether it's be against rich or poor, we cannot let how we view somebody from a financial status dictate whether we think that person is deserving of empathy, deserving of sympathy, deserving of life. I don't, and I think we get into this concept where we're so bloodthirsty for someone to pay for the animosity and the pain that we all feel, that it's easy to use that as a vehicle for that bloodthirst. And I just think that we have to again find ways to love and be human with one another, and then even then still be able to say, but still we have criticisms, we have issues, not sweeping things under the rug or not talking about it, but things that we can bring up and that we can talk about in a reasonable manner, but not to the point of this kind of, I view you as less of a human because you don't have money or because you do have money, or there's no way, we're nothing alike, you're nothing like me, because of that. And I think that's just kind of deepening that divide, that once it's gotten too far and nobody's listening to anybody and everybody just kind of in their own sex. Another concern that I've talked about a few times in this, and I'm going to keep bringing this up because I've seen it more times than not, and I've heard almost every black person, especially older black person, tell me this growing up, and I've seen more than enough examples of it happening. Minorities falsely believe that money will make them accepted by white people, and it leads to sometimes a hate or a disassociation from your own people. That's, I mean, and like again, I've seen more than enough examples of it, from politicians, from celebrities, from people in business. Just in the case of like, oh yeah, I put the hood behind me. I put all that behind me. I'm somewhere different now. And I get that success brought you to it brought you to experience and be exposed to different elements that people, mainly from that prior class level, that might be very much your same demographic level racially, might not be able to experience, but it didn't make them less, or their livelihood or their human experience less, or make yours more because you're now in that different category where you can experience different things. And to me, that's just something that I'm not sure if it can be fixed, but it's something that we have to keep bringing up. I hate that so many celebrities. I'll bring Snoop Dogg and Nelly because those are of the most recent ones. That, as long as the check is right, and the Trump administration can put enough money in front of them, they'll perform in front of a room full of white people that view every type of person that they came up with against as less than them. But because the money is right, and because they don't view those two particular as less than them because they're rich and famous, everything's good. But as Vivek Ramaswamy is a good example of this as well. Byron Matthews, the guy, a lot of your black Republicans are a good example of this. When the push comes to shove, they always seem to be on the outside still of the good boys club, of the closed room meetings, because at the end of the day, they're not white and they don't view you the same, regardless of how many times they brought you in and smiled with you, and gave you good looks and said, "Yeah, you're one of us." You're not, because they know at the end of the day that we are us and you are you. And regardless of class, that's one thing I can give white people, especially the rich white ones that control the world, is that regardless of class, they're gonna stick to their guns of saying, like, white people, we're us and you're you. And I think concern I have is that people are putting their frustrations and hatreds in society. And again, this comes back to that bloodthirst thing. People are very ready for there to be someone to pay. And I get it. We're in a very frustrating time in our history. And people are ready for there to be someone to pay. There's something to pin it on. Someone has to be held accountable. And we're letting that need, I should say, that frustration and hatred based upon our hardships, we're letting that turn into a hate of each other based upon our financial statuses. Based upon a lot of different other things too, but financial status is becoming like almost a huge, just off back. I hate you because you're rich. I love you because I hate you because you're rich, or I hate you because you're not my financial part, or you're poor so you're worthless. You don't like, or you're not even that you're poor or you're worthless. You're poor so you can't identify with me. I don't deal with broke shit like that. I get it, but that people are putting their frustrations and their need for there to be somebody to pay for it into hating a particular class or a sect of people, which in classism is crazy because a lot of times, especially if you say, well, you hate the poor, you're hating poor whites, poor blacks, poor Hispanics, poor Asians, poor gay, poor straight, like, yeah, like, you know what I'm saying? So it's putting, just that need to find somebody to blame it on, I think is growing, and classism is being used as a way to identify that. And, the rich are to blame for my problems. And I wouldn't be in the situation I was if the rich weren't dominating the world. That may or may not be true. But people use that, especially a lot on the internet now, because it makes them feel better because it gives them somebody to blame. And as this won't ever change, it probably be the same to the day that this country ends. But the rich are finding more ways to separate themselves from everyone else, and they're furthering that classism gap and that empathy gap. And so we all know that the rich have always tried to find ways to keep money, not just keep their money, but to make more, to take your money too. And I think as those ways become more successful, especially with the current administration in place, as you see corruption in those senses become more blatant, as you see the ultra rich profit margins and revenues rapidly increasing at record rates, it only furthers that animosity, which is understandable, from people. It only furthers it. And to the point, it's hard for me to ask people to be more empathetic when you have some that are just blatantly stealing to get rich or doing the most corrupt to get rich. But it does further that gap. The more that this happens and the more that this goes on, it does further that gap, and it does just make it get worse and worse to a point where it will be a class war type tipping point. And I think class wars are always hard because it's there's no uniform type of person. There's no, you're poor, you're rich type of person, because you can be a rich black man, you can be a poor white man, a poor white woman. So while it is always going to be hard to really for that to actually, quote unquote, happen, the gap is widening and people see it and people feel it and people hate it. And it's just a scary thought about where that could go. So, I think it's, I think to kind of conclude, bring it back, we know that the powerful run our society, and power most oftentimes identifies with rich. And they want us to divide and fight amongst ourselves. And I think that this classism thing is an example of that, because oftentimes the ultra rich aren't accessible. They're not people that you see at 7-Eleven or Walmart or you see driving around town. So, or you even people that you really can interact with or see on the internet. So, a lot of times this anger, animosity, discussions, warfare is just people amongst people. It might be the upper class, not the super rich. You know what I'm saying? But it's more or less a war against where those classes are talking about the bottom four fighting amongst themselves, while the top at the penthouse just kind of look down and laugh at it. And I do believe it's like that. And it's important that we all remember that, we're human first. And that, we have to judge each other based on the content of our character. And if your wealth is based upon bad acts as a human being, then that's worth judging and criticizing. But just judging someone based upon their social or economic class is not beneficial or right to do. And then, because the classism divide is spreading so quickly, I think something must be done, before the damage becomes unrepairable. People are frankly sick and tired. I think the younger generation, especially because they grew up in a time where from their youngest thought, they were told that the economy was trashed out. While our generation, the kind of millennials, we kind of grew up with this. I think we grew up with the false, I don't know if it was a false narrative, but we grew up with the narrative that, if you just, you work right, you work hard, you'll be able to, start you a family, get you a house, have a retirement, and die with some money in your pocket to give to your kids. And I think we kind of took that promise of what the world was, and we see it. A lot of us see it as okay, that's not really what happened, and that's where our animosity came from. The younger generation was told from the beginning that the economy was trashed and that the world was pretty much done out, and so that's where I think a lot of their apathy comes from. But the more that this gap widens, just the scarier that it gets because a lot more of that apathy and a lot more of that animosity builds. And I mean, shit, what does a dollar cost? I mean, like at a certain point when you like, I mean, to those, if there's any that ever ultra rich that are out there listening to this, at what point? I don't want to say at what point is enough, but like when you've taken everything and money can't is the only thing left and it can't buy anything else. What does it mean? And what does it matter? And so that's just my thoughts, my opinions on it. But I appreciate you all for taking the time to listen. Follow me on social media, Instagram RTD underscore III, Facebook Robert Trey Davis III. Look out for new episodes coming out on Spotify soon. I have a few more episodes coming out soon. Appreciate y'all for listening. Again, thanks for tuning in to Maybe I'm Just Not Getting It podcast. I'm your host, Robert Davis, and I'll see you next time. God bless. Peace out.